The house was quiet in the way only money can make quiet, thick, padded, engineered. Even the air felt filtered, disciplined. Westbridge Heights didn't allow chaos to linger. Neither did I. I watched the security feed on the wall, mounted display as the last delivery truck rolled past the gate and the steel bars sealed behind it. The cameras followed it automatically, sliding across angles I'd paid to eliminate blind spots. Biometric access only. Motion sensors calibrated to human gait. Infrared along the perimeter. A system designed to keep threats out. And to keep my world exactly the way I intended it to be. My routine had always been the scaffolding of my life. Up at 40:30, cold plunge. 2 espresso shots at 50:05. 40 minutes of high-intensity training. 1 hour of deep work before sunrise. I didn't try to be disciplined. I built discipline into the architecture of my days the way I built companies, by treating weakness as an expensive flaw that could be engineered out. That's why the moment I realized my father's watch was missing, it felt like something more than theft. It felt like an invasion. I'd been in the study, the one room I allowed myself to keep human, not just polished. Dark walnut shelves. A leather chair that still carried the faint, old scent of cigar smoke. I didn't smoke, but he had. The watch had been in the top drawer of the desk, placed in a velvet slot with the kind of care people reserve for fragile memories. I opened the drawer, empty. For 3 seconds, my mind refused to accept it. It went still, like a computer encountering corrupted code. Then the reflex came to reconstruct, audit, control. I ran the possibilities like a spreadsheet. I hadn't moved it. I knew where it lived. I tracked my own movements the way other men track their expenses. I checked again, slower this time, as if the watch might reveal itself out of shame. Nothing. I heard faint footsteps outside the study. Soft, measured. The sound of someone who tried not to take up space. Ariana Brooks. She'd worked in my estate for 3 years. Always early, always quiet. A uniform that fit perfectly, hair pulled back, eyes steady. The kind of professionalism that made her almost invisible until you looked directly at her. Until you chose to see her. Ariana? I called, keeping my voice even. Controlled. Come in. She stepped into the doorway without hesitation, hands folded in front of her the way she always did. There was dignity in her posture that didn't beg. It didn't apologize for existing. Yes, Mr. Calloway? The way she said, my name never sounded afraid. It was respectful, but not fragile. I'd always liked that. Or at least, I told myself I did. I leaned against the desk, careful not to show urgency. I'd learned long ago that urgency gave people leverage. When did you last clean in here? Her eyes flicked to the shelves, the desk, the perfectly aligned pens. This morning. Around 9. Same as always. And did you open that drawer? I nodded toward the top right. Her gaze followed. No, sir. I dusted the surface. I don't open drawers unless I'm instructed. That was true. It was one of the standards I'd insisted on when she started. Clear boundaries, clear permissions. Security. Order. But order had just been broken. I felt the slightest tightening in my throat. The watch that was in there is gone. Ariana didn't blink fast. She didn't recoil. She didn't rush to perform innocence. Her face held the information like it was a stone placed in her palm, heavy, but not surprising. I'm sorry to hear that, she said quietly. I haven't seen it. There was a pause, not awkward, not uncertain, just space. The space unsettled me. Who else has been in this room? I asked. She glanced down the hall, thinking. Me. The maintenance team came through 2 days ago to check the HVAC vent near the ceiling. I frowned. I remembered authorizing it. 2 men. Company uniforms. Signed in at the gate. Background checked. But my mind did what it always did when my world felt threatened. It searched for the simplest point of failure. The most controllable explanation. And Ariana was standing in front of me. A part of me didn't say the word out loud, but it floated there anyway, ugly and convenient. Temptation, opportunity. People who don't belong in rooms like this. I hated that thought the moment it surfaced, because it felt like a thought I hadn't chosen, like something inherited, like a quiet bias dressed up as risk management. I kept my voice calm. This watch belonged to my father. Ariana's eyes met mine, steady. I understand. Do you? I heard something sharper in my tone than I intended. Do you understand what something like that means? Her expression didn't change, but something in her gaze tightened, not with fear, but with restraint. The kind of restraint that comes from swallowing indignities for years because dignity is expensive and she had learned to protect it. I understand loss, she said, and I understand what it means when someone assumes the worst before they know the truth. The words landed quietly, but they hit with force. They weren't an accusation. They were a mirror. For a second, I didn't speak. I didn't like mirrors. I turned away, walking toward the security panel embedded beside the study door. Touchscreen, passwordless. My fingerprint, my iris, my face, my identity as key. I tapped through the logs, pretending I was looking for data when really I was looking for certainty. Memsever? Calloway, Ariana said, and there was something different in her tone. Not softer. Not louder. Just firmer. If you believe I took it, you should say it. I looked at her, irritation rising. This isn't personal. It's security. It's always personal, she replied, voice still controlled. It just isn't always loud. My chest tightened again. I didn't like being cornered by calm. I stared at the logs. Door opened at 9:12 a.m., closed at 9:14. Ariana's presence confirmed by hallway camera. No other recorded entry. No forced access. The clean answer my mind wanted was right there. It would have been so easy to turn suspicion into conclusion. So easy to make the world simple again. You understand the consequences, I said, too cold now to pretend otherwise. Ariana nodded once. I understand what happens when people like you decide they're already right. There it was, people like you. Not loud. Just true enough to sting. I could have stopped. I could have taken a breath and considered the HVAC team. Considered my own blind spots. That considered the possibility that my perfect system had a flaw that wasn't human. But control isn't just a habit. It's a hunger. And hunger doesn't like uncertainty. I made the decision before I admitted to myself I was making it. I'm calling the police, I said. Ariana didn't flinch. Of course you are. That calmness felt like defiance, even though she stood perfectly still. My hand hovered over the call button on the wall panel. Do you have anything you want to say before I do? I asked. Yes, she said. I want you to understand something. I paused, finger still above the screen. Her eyes didn't waver. If you do this, it won't just be about a watch. For a moment, then the words didn't compute. Then my mind translated them into what I could tolerate. She's warning me. She's trying to scare me. I pressed the button anyway. The call was clean. Efficient. I gave my address, my name, the value of the heirloom. I didn't mention Ariana directly, but the implication was in the silence. In the way I framed it, someone inside the house. Someone with access. Someone who shouldn't have been alone near it. I ended the call and felt a familiar rush of relief. Action taken, control regained. Ariana's voice cut through it, soft as a blade. You didn't even ask to see my bag. I narrowed my eyes. What? She gestured toward the hallway, toward the staff entrance where her things would be. If you were actually certain, you would have checked. But you didn't want certainty. You wanted procedure. You wanted power to feel clean. I felt heat rise in my face, anger, yes, but also something else. Something that tasted like being exposed. I don't owe you an explanation, I said. No, she agreed. You don't owe me one. That's the problem. I walked away before I could say something worse. I moved through the mansion like I owned not just the building, but the air inside it. Cameras watched me. Doors opened for me. Lights adjusted to my presence. My house responded like an obedient machine. Outside, beyond the tinted glass, Westbridge Heights sat immaculate in the afternoon sun, lawns trimmed like velvet, streets clean enough to eat off. The kind of neighborhood that used gates not just for safety, but for separation. I stepped onto the balcony above the front entrance, looking down at the long driveway. I could see the gate from here. I could see the road beyond it. I could see, in the distance, the first flash of red and blue. Sirens approached, growing louder, slicing through the engineered quiet like a violation. For the first time in years, the sound didn't make me feel protected. It made me feel watched. Ariana stood at the base of the staircase in the entry hall, hands still folded, posture still composed. She wasn't packing. She wasn't running. She wasn't begging. She looked like someone who had already decided she would not shrink to fit someone else's suspicion. The front door opened. 2 officers stepped in, their eyes scanning the marble floors, the chandelier, the expensive stillness. Their presence changed the temperature of the room. One of them glanced up at me on the balcony. "Mr. Calloway." I nodded, keeping my face firm. "Yes." They began to move forward, and that's when Ariana lifted her eyes to mine, not pleading, not angry, something quieter, older, like she was looking at a man she'd studied for years and had finally found the exact crack in the armor. Then she spoke, just loud enough for the officers to hear. "Before you start," she said, voice steady, "you should know. Your security system already recorded who took that watch." My breath caught. Because she didn't look at the officers when she said it. She looked only at me, like she already knew what the footage would reveal, and like the truth was about to cost me more than my father's heirloom ever could. The words Ariana had just spoken hung in the foyer like smoke that refused to rise. Your security system already recorded who took that watch. For a moment, I didn't feel the marble under my feet or the cool air moving through the vents. I felt only the presence of the officers, the weight of the chandelier overhead, and the fact that Ariana hadn't looked anywhere but at me when she said it, like the truth wasn't somewhere in the house. Like it was somewhere in me. The taller officer shifted, clearing his throat with polite discomfort. "Ma'am, are you saying you know who took the item?" Ariana kept her hands folded. Her posture didn't change. If anything, she looked calmer now, like a person who had been forced to carry silence too long and had finally set it down. "I'm saying the cameras will tell you," she replied. "If you let them." I wanted to cut in, to reclaim the narrative before it could shape itself without me. "My system records everything," I said sharply, the words coming out more defensive than I intended. "There's no ambiguity. That's the point." Ariana's eyes didn't flinch at my tone. They only dimmed slightly, like disappointment had found a comfortable place to sit. The shorter officer glanced around, taking in the entry hall, the glossy surfaces, the kind of luxury that asked to be respected. "All right," he said. "Well, start with statements. Mr. Calloway, you reported a missing heirloom. Value, 7 figures. I answered without hesitation, because numbers were easier than acknowledging what else was missing: certainty, control, dignity. The officer's eyebrows lifted. He tried to keep it neutral and failed. "And the last time you saw it?" "This morning. In my study?" I said. "It was in a locked drawer. Now it's gone." He turned slightly toward Ariana. "And you work here?" 3 years, she said. "Full-time." The way she said it carried something beyond a timeline. It sounded like endurance. The taller officer asked the first question everyone asks when they've already made up their mind what kind of story they're in. "Do you have a bag with you?" "Purse." Toot. I watched Ariana's face carefully, waiting for a crack, a denial that sounded too rehearsed, a plea, a tremble, something that would confirm what my instincts had already tried to label as risk. But she simply nodded. "Where is it?" "In the staff entry closet," she answered. "Same place it always is." The officer glanced at me for permission. I nodded, and the door to that part of my life, my staff entrance, my hidden corridors, opened with my approval, like everything else in this house. They walked her toward the hall. Not rough, not cruel. Just official. The kind of official that pretended neutrality while carrying the gravity of a decision that rarely fell on men like me. I followed at a distance, because I couldn't stand being left out of my own accusation. If this was going to happen, it would happen inside my frame. The foyer had a glass wall facing the street, and I saw movement outside, neighbors pausing on their morning walks, a few cars slowing down just a fraction too long. Westbridge Heights didn't gossip openly. It observed. It cataloged. It judged with quiet precision. By the time we reached the staff corridor, I could already feel my reputation beginning to shift in the air, like a painting on a wall slightly tilting, almost imperceptible. but enough to ruin the symmetry. The officer opened the closet and asked Ariana to retrieve her bag. She did, calmly, like someone retrieving a coat. No shaking hands, no defensive speech. She placed the bag on a small table and unzipped it herself. I expected the moment to feel triumphant. It didn't. Inside were ordinary things. A phone charger, a small notebook with neat handwriting, a paperback book with a worn spine, a pack of gum, a folded cloth mask, a small plastic container of homemade food, rice, greens, something that's faintly like garlic and warmth. The officer sifted carefully, respectful enough to avoid turning it into a humiliation, but thorough enough to make sure humiliation still did its job. No watch. The taller officer cleared his throat again. Nothing here. I felt my jaw tighten, not relief, pressure. Because every second Ariana remained composed made me look more like a man chasing a story he wanted to be true. We returned to the foyer, and the house felt different now. Not because anything had changed in the architecture, but because my control had been tested and found temporarily inconclusive. The officers began their questioning in the open entry hall, as if to make sure the house itself heard them. "Brooks," the shorter officer asked, "do you have any prior arrests?" "No," she said. "Any outstanding warrants?" "No." "Have you ever been accused of theft by a previous employer?" "No." He wrote something down. Then he asked for identification. Ariana handed it over without hesitation. The officer looked it over, then stepped aside to run her information. In that brief gap, I expected Ariana to turn to me, to ask why, to demand an apology, to plead at least. Instead, she looked past me, toward the glass wall and the street beyond it, like she was watching the neighborhood watch her. And that was when I understood what unsettled me most. She wasn't afraid of the police. She was tired of the story. The taller officer returned with a subtle shift in his expression, professional surprise. "Clean," he said quietly to his partner. "Nothing." He turned back to Ariana. "We'll need references, ma'am. Names of previous employers." Ariana nodded. "I have them written down," she said, then paused, eyes flicking toward me for only a second. Her mystery. "Calloway has them too. He required them. He required everything." The words were simple, but they carried a clean edge. They painted my standards as what they were, a wall built high enough to keep some people constantly proving they deserved to breathe near it. I spoke before I could stop myself. "That's not discrimination. That's policy." Ariana's eyes returned to mine, not angry, not pleading, just steady. "Policies can still have fingerprints," she said. The shorter officer glanced between us, sensing something beyond a missing watch, something that lived in tone and history. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "we're going to need to review your surveillance footage and your access logs." "Of course," I replied instantly. "It's all stored on a secure server. Redundant backups." I led them to the security room, my command center. A windowless space behind a locked door, lined with monitors, a central console, and a wall of neatly labeled data drives. A place where everything in my life was reduced to angles and timestamps. When we entered, Ariana stood in the doorway, not invited inside, but not barred either. I felt a flicker of irritation at her presence, then a flicker of guilt for feeling irritated at all. The officers watched as I tapped into the feed. My fingers moved quickly, confident. I pulled up the hallway near the study. The system displayed the morning timeline like a clean heartbeat. 9:12 a.m. door opens. Ariana walks past camera 3. 9:13 she pauses near the linen closet. 9:14 she continues. The footage was clean. Too clean. It showed what it showed, and it didn't show the watch. The shorter officer leaned in. "We need the study camera." I tapped, and the screen shifted. The study feed showed the door, the desk, the shelves. At 9:12 the door opened. Ariana entered, carrying a dust cloth. She wiped surfaces carefully. She never approached the desk drawer, never bent down, never paused in a way that suggested hidden movement. I felt a cold satisfaction begin to form, like I could still salvage the narrative by turning it into something else. Look how thorough I am. Look how innocent the system is. Look how reasonable my suspicion was to call you here at all. Then Ariana spoke quietly from the doorway. "That's not all the cameras. The room fell slightly still. I turned. What? She didn't look intimidated. There's a camera near the west hallway, she said. The one that faces the private stairwell. It's been glitching. I've reported it before. I frowned. It hasn't been. But even as I said it, my mind flashed through a memory. Ariana, months ago, calmly mentioning the flicker. Me dismissing it because the system had never failed me in ways I cared about. The taller officer straightened. Show us that camera. I pulled it up, more annoyed than worried. The feed loaded. And my stomach tightened off. There was a gap. A stark, blank segment. A small notification line across the bottom reads footage unavailable, 12 minutes. The shorter officer looked at me. That's unusual. It's a technical error, I said too quickly. It happens. Sometimes a camera reboots. It's nothing. Ariana's face didn't change, but I saw something in her eyes, confirmation. Like she'd been waiting for me to find the missing piece. Not because it proved her innocence, but because it proved something uglier about the house itself. The taller officer's voice remained neutral, but his attention sharpened. Mr. Calloway, with systems like this, footage loss is rare, especially for 12 full minutes. We'll need a deeper look. I can have my security vendor here within the hour, I said, trying to sound in command. They'll confirm it's a glitch. Maybe, the taller officer replied. Or maybe someone didn't want us to see that hallway. The words made my jaw clench. No one has that kind of access. That was when the second door opened behind us, and a man stepped into the security room like he belonged there. No hesitation, no spectacle, just presence. He wore a plain jacket, not a uniform, and his eyes moved across the screens in a way that told me he wasn't here to be impressed by wealth or intimidated by it. Detective Rowan Pierce, he said, showing a badge. I'll take it from here. The officers shifted subtly, deferential without being submissive. Pierce didn't look at Ariana first. He didn't look at me first. He looked at the system, at the missing segment, like it was a sentence with one word crossed out. How long have you owned this system? He asked. 6 years, I said. And it's never failed. It's the best money can buy. Pierce nodded as if I'd told him the sky was blue. Money buys a lot, he said, almost casually, including the illusion that nothing can touch you. The words irritated me more than they should have. Are we here to solve a theft or psychoanalyze my lifestyle? Pierce finally looked at me. His gaze was calm, not hostile. But it carried something that made my skin prickle, an unwillingness to accept my version of reality as the default. We're here to solve what happened, he said. And what happened includes what you don't want to look at. He approached the console and asked, Do you have administrator privileges? I'm the administrator. I snapped. Pierce didn't react. Good. Then pull up your system logs. Not the video. The access logs, manual overrides, firmware interruptions, everything. I hesitated, only for a fraction of a second. But in that fraction, I felt exposed. Like the detective could see my instinct to control the flow of information. I opened the logs. Lines of data filled the screen. Timestamps, user IDs, access points. Pierce leaned in, scanning quickly. Ariana remained in the doorway, still silent, still composed. But now, in the glow of my monitors, she looked less like a suspect and more like a witness to something I had refused to witness for years. Pierce's finger stopped on a line. He tapped the screen once, then again isolating the entry. Manual override initiated West Hall camera 9:07 a.m. Manual override ended 9:19 a.m. User source internal console my mouth went dry. That's impossible, I whispered, the certainty leaving my voice before I could catch it. Pierce straightened slowly, turning to face me. It's not a glitch, he said. Someone manually disabled that camera. I forced a scoff. No one has access to the internal console except me. Pierce held my gaze without blinking, then delivered the next sentence with quiet precision. The kind that doesn't need volume to land. Mr. Calloway, he said. The override didn't come from the general security room. He pointed to the line on the screen, then to the system's access tree. It came from inside your private office. Detective Pierce's words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They simply stayed. It came from inside your private office. For a second, My mind refused the shape of that sentence. My office was my cleanest space, my most controlled space. The one room in the house where even the air felt like it had to earn permission to move. That's not possible, I said, and heard how weak it sounded the moment it left my mouth. Pierce didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He let my denial sit there and rot under fluorescent light. "We'll verify," he replied. "But the log doesn't guess." The two uniformed officers shifted uncomfortably, like they'd wandered into something that was no longer a simple theft call. The security room, once my command center, now felt like a courtroom built out of screens. Ariana remained in the doorway. Her expression hadn't changed, but something about her stillness felt heavier now, like she'd been carrying this moment in her chest for a long time. Not the watch. Not the police. The moment where my certainty would be forced to touch reality. I wanted to look away from her, but I couldn't. I found myself searching her face the way I search data, trying to locate the point where she broke. She didn't. Pierce stepped aside and spoke into his radio, requesting a forensic tech to clone the system logs. His voice stayed even, like he was careful not to feed the tension that was already swelling in the room. I swallowed, forcing my body into composure. If someone accessed my office console, then they had my credentials, I said. That means it's either a system vulnerability or... I stopped myself before I said the obvious. Before I said her, because the moment the idea rose, it felt uglier now. Less security. More what it had always been, suspicion that needed a face. Pierce's gaze met mine. "Or it means someone who belongs in that office did it," he said. The implication stung, even though it wasn't an accusation. It was simply an opening for a truth my pride had sealed shut. I left the security room without asking permission. My feet carried me down the corridor, past the framed art that had once impressed me, past the glass that had once made me feel untouchable. The mansion didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a machine I couldn't fully read. My office door recognized my fingerprint and clicked open. The sound was familiar, comforting, until it wasn't, until I realized the lock was only as meaningful as the hands that had used it. Inside, everything was exactly where it belonged. Desk immaculate. Monitors dark. The leather chair angled toward the window. No sign of intrusion. No overturned drawer. No mess. That was almost worse. Because if someone had been here, they'd been careful. Deliberate. They'd moved through my space like they understood it. And that thought dragged me backward. Not to this morning, but to a memory I rarely allowed myself to touch. I was 13 the first time my father taught me that trust was a liability. He'd come home late, suit jacket over his arm, the eyes hard with a kind of disappointment that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the world. He'd been a man who didn't speak about feelings, only consequences. The kind of father who believed tenderness made boys soft and softness made men break. He'd walked into the kitchen, opened the drawer where my mother kept cash for groceries, and found it empty. My mother stood at the sink, hands in soap water, at her shoulders tightening as if she'd heard the drawer before she'd seen it. "Where is it?" he asked. Not loud. "Worry." She began, then stopped, as if she realized any answer would sound like a lie under the weight of his certainty. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He just looked at her like a stranger who had disappointed him. Later, when I followed him into his study, his version of a fortress, he didn't comfort me. He didn't explain the human mess of marriage or fear or survival. He gave me a philosophy. "People take what they can," he said, pouring a drink with steady hands. "And when they can't take your money, they take your peace." What if they didn't mean to? I'd asked, still naive enough to imagine mistakes were innocent. He'd glanced at me like I'd asked if gravity could be negotiated. "Intent doesn't matter," he replied. "Only results. If you leave the door unlocked, you don't get to act surprised when someone walks in." That sentence became the foundation of everything I built. Not because it was wise, because it was simple. Years later, the first betrayal that mattered came in a boardroom. I was 29, running my first major product launch. I'd pulled 80-hour weeks, slept on office couches, lived on coffee and certainty. I trusted my co-founder, trusted him because we'd struggled together, because we'd been broke together, because I thought shared hardship created loyalty. He'd sold my proprietary code to a competitor 2 months before launch. Not out of hatred, not out of desperation, out of convenience. I remember the day I found out. The conference room glass reflected my face back at me, calm, controlled, successful. And inside, something hardened into place that never softened again. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I learned that trust wasn't a feeling. It was a risk model. And risk models required control. From that point on, I built my life the way I built my company: redundancy, oversight, constraints. I called it discipline. I called it standards. I called it leadership. I didn't call it loneliness, because loneliness sounded like weakness, and weakness was something my father had trained me to eliminate. A knock at my office door pulled me back. Pierce stood there, flanked by a forensic tech carrying a laptop and a small black case. "You don't mind if we check this room?" Pierce said. It wasn't a question, not really. I forced a tight smile. "Do what you need." The tech moved in, connecting a device to my office console. Pierce's eyes tracked every detail, not just the machines, my bookshelf, the framed photo on my desk I never looked at anymore, the unopened mail I didn't have time to pretend mattered. My phone buzzed on the desk, a notification I hadn't wanted to see. A calendar reminder: Caldwell acquisition, follow-up call. My throat tightened. Caldwell wasn't a deal. It was a lifeline. Or it had been. I tried to buy them last quarter aggressively, publicly, the kind of acquisition that would have silenced analysts who'd started whispering that Callaway Systems had peaked. I needed that win. Not just for the market. For myself. The deal had collapsed at the last minute. I'd told the press it was a strategic withdrawal. In private, I'd been bleeding. Stock volatility. Investors questioning my judgment. A competitor sniffing around my patents. I had spreadsheets full of risk and no column for how it felt to sense the world leaning toward doubt. Control was the only thing that kept the panic from showing. And now, in my own office, with a detective dismantling my system's certainty, control felt like a suit that no longer fit. In the doorway, Ariana appeared again, escorted by an officer, but walking on her own terms. She looked smaller in my office, not because she was diminished, but because my space was designed to swallow people whole. Still, she held herself like she refused to disappear. Pierce glanced at her. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "we're going to need to check your phone as well. Location data, messages, anything relevant." Before the officer could even step forward, Ariana spoke. "You can." The room went still. The officer looked surprised. Pierce's brows lifted slightly, as if he hadn't expected cooperation to arrive so cleanly. Ariana reached into her pocket and held out her phone like an offering, not of guilt, but of certainty. "I want you to examine it," she said. "Fully. If there's anything on there that proves I took something, you'll find it." My chest tightened with something I refused to name. Because her willingness didn't feel like desperation. It felt like confidence. Pierce took the phone carefully. "You understand we'll look at everything?" "I understand," Ariana replied. Then, after a beat, she looked at me, not the officers, not the detective. Me. "I don't have anything to hide. I never did." The words shouldn't have hurt. But they did, because they implied I had been hiding something long before this watch ever went missing. Hiding behind standards, behind policies, behind systems that made my suspicion feel righteous. Pierce handed the phone to the forensic tech. The tech connected it to his laptop, fingers moving quickly. A data began to populate the screen: timestamps, GPS pings, Wi-Fi connections. I watched, tense, waiting for the moment the narrative snapped back into my control, waiting for proof that would justify what I'd already done. The tech paused, then paused longer. Pierce leaned in. "What is it?" The tech's eyes narrowed, scanning the location history again as if he didn't trust what he was seeing. "Her phone wasn't in the house," he said slowly. "Not during that missing 12-minute segment." My pulse spiked. "That's impossible," I said again, and hated myself for how often that word was failing me today. The tech turned the screen toward Pierce. Location data shows her device connected to a public Wi-Fi network near Westbridge Transit. 2 miles from here. Timestamp aligns exactly with the missing footage. Silence thickened. Even the hum of my monitors sounded louder. Ariana didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just stood there, calm, as if she'd known the truth would eventually show itself no matter how hard I tried to bury it. Pierce's eyes lifted to mine. Not accusing. Not sympathetic. Just certain. If she wasn't here, he said quietly, then someone else needed that camera turned off. He let that hang for one breath, then added the sentence that made the room feel suddenly smaller. And whoever did it wanted you to blame her first. My mouth went dry. Because in that moment, the watch stopped mattering. What mattered was the realization that my house, my fortress, had been used to expose something about me I'd spent a lifetime building walls to avoid. And I didn't know yet whether the person who overrode my system was trying to steal from Milla or trying to show me exactly who I really was. The air in my office felt thinner after the tech said it, like oxygen had become something that had to be earned. Her phone wasn't in the house. I stared at the screen, waiting for the numbers to correct themselves, for the map to snap back into the clean story I'd already decided on. But the location history didn't flinch. It sat there in cold precision, a line of truth that didn't care about my pride. Detective Pierce leaned closer. Zoom in, he ordered calmly. The forensic tech did, the fingers moving with the same detached speed I used when I was dismantling a competitor's forecast. The map expanded. Streets sharpened. Pins clustered. Then the tech paused again, jaw tightening. To HM, he muttered. Pierce's head tilted. What now? The tech dragged the timeline cursor back and forth, cross-referencing timestamps with Wi-Fi identifiers. I need to correct something, he said, voice cautious. That earlier ping I mentioned, Westbridge Transit, was a network name, not a location. My stomach sank, then lifted, then sank again. I hated how quickly I latched onto any correction that might restore my certainty. Pierce didn't. Meaning someone labeled a private network Westbridge Transit. It's not public Wi-Fi. The tech into the network details and pulled up the BSSID signatures. This is a local router. Range is limited. The device connected to it from here. He zoomed again. The pin landed not on the street outside my gate, but deeper inside my property line, near the detached guest house, where the laundry annex and service utility room sat behind hedges designed to keep that part of my life invisible. The room went silent in a way that felt hostile. Ariana's eyes flickered for the first time, just a small shift, like a muscle resisting fatigue. That's where I was, she said quietly. Pierce looked up. Explain. Ariana's voice stayed even, but I heard the strain underneath now, like a thread pulled too tight for too long. The guesthouse laundry. The dryer's been inconsistent. Sometimes it stops mid-cycle. I went out there to restart it and finish folding the linens. The tech nodded without emotion. Her phone GPS and Wi-Fi connection both support that. The signal strength matches proximity to the guesthouse router. I felt my throat tighten with a new, uglier realization. She hadn't been 2 miles away. She had been on my property the entire time, just not where the missing camera would have shown her. The lie I'd been feeding myself, that I was simply being careful, began to rot from the inside. Because this wasn't about whether she was present. It was about where she was allowed to be present, and how easily I decided that presence equaled guilt. Pierce turned his attention back to the logs on my office system. No confirm the override source. The tech brought up the access chain again, this time opening the authentication layer. A new panel populated with credential markers, the biometric token, device signature, session key, admin profile. Pierce's finger hovered above the line like he was about to touch a bruise. Auth method biometric, iris tuff fingerprint, user Sebastian Calloway. My vision narrowed. No, I said too fast. No, that can't be right. Pierce didn't blink. You're saying your own system forged your biometrics. I'm saying I didn't do it. I snapped, and the word didn't sounded childish in the space. I haven't touched the console today until you told me to. Ariana's gaze moved to me, and I couldn't tell whether she was watching a man unravel or a man finally being seen accurately. The tech spoke carefully, like he knew wealthy men didn't like to hear that their machines could disobey. There are a few possibilities, he said. Auto login sessions. Cached biometric tokens. Remote session hijacking. Pierce nodded. Or someone used your credentials while you weren't aware. My jaw clenched hard enough to ache. No one can use my eyes. Pierce's tone stayed mild, which somehow made it worse. Then maybe someone used your access through your environment. Your desk. Your console. Your habits. That word, habits, hit me like a slap dressed as logic. Because habits were predictable. Predictability was a vulnerability, and I had built my life on the belief that only other people were vulnerable. Pierce instructed the tech to begin a forensic audit of my office computer. The tech opened his black case and pulled out a device that looked too small to carry the kind of damage it could do. He connected it to my machine and began cloning the drive. Every click sounded like an accusation. Outside, beyond the glass walls, I saw the neighborhood changing in real time. A jogger slowed, pretending to stretch. A white SUV stopped near my gate, then rolled forward again. Its driver's head turned just long enough to confirm what rumor would soon do the rest. Westbridge Heights fed on reputation the way fire fed on oxygen. Quietly. Efficiently. Without remorse. The staff felt it too. Through the hallway camera feed, I saw two of my housekeepers hovering near the kitchen entrance, whispering behind their hands. They kept glancing toward the security room, toward my office, toward Ariana standing under police scrutiny like a symbol everyone was afraid to name. My estate manager, Miles, appeared at the end of the corridor, face tight. He looked at the officers, then at me, then away as if eye contact itself could implicate him. Staff morale didn't collapse with a single impact. It fractured like glass, thin cracks spreading outward, invisible until the entire pane suddenly couldn't hold. My mouth tasted metallic. Pierce's voice cut through the hum of my machines. Mr. Calloway, has anyone else had access to this office today? Assistants? IT vendors? Contractors? No, I said. This room is restricted. Pierce didn't let it go. How restricted? Biometric only. Yes, and do you ever leave sessions open? The words weren't loud. I hesitated. They didn't need that hesitation was enough. It filled the room with Pierce's eyes sharp and old. You do. I opened my mouth crawl up my neck. But there was sometimes I say without sounding like the system locks after a delay. The tech's fingers paused. 5 minutes, then moved again. Pierce nodded slowly. Detective. 5 minutes is a lifetime for someone seeing another who knows what they're doing. Pierce stepped closer. Ariana shifted slightly by the door. The tech pulled up a deeper as if her spine needed something hidden beneath the user to hold the facing logs. Her composure remained. System events. But it was no longer effortless. Level entries. It was effort. Security tamper flags. Pierce noticed. There's evidence of deliberate log grooming, but his gaze acknowledged her humanity. Not full deletion. MZ. More like selective smoothing. He asked. Someone knew you during the 12-minute blood gap. Ran cold. You were at the guest house. That's impossible. Anyone with you? But the word had lost all authority. Anyone. It was just a reflex now. Ariana's lips pressed together before she answered. This wasn't a random theft. That's the point of those areas, isn't it? This was staged. People don't look. Behind him, Ariana's composure finally slipped, only in the smallest way. Her eyes glistened. Not with tears falling, but with the threat of tears being refused. She turned her face a fraction, as if she wouldn't allow me the satisfaction of watching her break. And that was when I understood the cruelty of what I'd done. I hadn't just accused her. I'd summoned the entire weight of law into my home and aimed it at her dignity, convinced I was doing something righteous. Pierce's phone buzzed. He ignored it. The tech continued clicking, peering deeper into the timeline. Then he froze. Pierce leaned in. What? The tech swallowed. I found the exact moment the override was initiated, he said, voice quieter now. And I verified it with the call log from your wall panel. My pulse began to hammer, fast and wrong. Pierce looked at me like he was about to open a door I had bolted shut from the inside. Mr. Calloway, he said slowly, you called the police at Henfy 03 a.m. point? I stared, not understanding. The tech turned the laptop slightly so I could see the highlighted entries. Manual override initiated 100 Ozer a.m. Admin auth. Sebastian Calloway biometric. West Hall camera disabled. I felt the room tilt, as if the mansion itself had shifted under my feet. Pierce didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The override happened, he said, exactly 3 minutes before you reported the watch missing. And in that instant, the question changed, because it could no longer be about who stole the watch. It became something far worse. If my credentials initiated the override minutes before I made the call, then someone had been inside my control before I even realized I'd lost it. The moment Detective Pierce said the override happened 3 minutes before I called the police, my office stopped feeling like mine. It felt like a room built to expose me. The forensic tech kept clicking, pulling threads out of my system with calm patience, while I stood there trying to decide whether anger or fear would protect my pride better. Neither one fit. Both felt childish under Pierce's gaze. "Walk me through your morning again," Pierce said. "I forced air into my lungs. I told you. I went into my study, opened the drawer, saw the watch was missing, and then you called us," he finished, eyes locked on me. "But the system says the camera was disabled before you discovered it missing." "That's not possible," I said, and hated how small I sounded. Pierce didn't move. "Then something about your timeline is wrong," he said evenly. "Or your system is compromised. Either way, you don't get to decide which truth is more convenient." In the doorway, Ariana stood like a quiet storm refusing to become spectacle. She wasn't vindicated. She wasn't triumphant. She looked emptied out, like each minute had taken a piece of her that the police could never put back. I caught myself watching her, searching for the emotion I expected: relief, anger, tears. What I saw instead was exhaustion. Pierce nodded at the tech. "Let's confirm the asset is actually missing. Callaway, you have other secure storage." I almost laughed. Of course I did. I had safes the way other people had drawers. Layers. Redundancies. A life built on the idea that you could outsmart uncertainty by locking it away. "There's a secondary safe in the closet," I said, voice tight, "and a vault downstairs." Pierce's eyes flicked toward the uniformed officers. "We'll check." I led them to the closet safe first. My fingers moved automatically over the keypad, as if speed could replace calm. The safe opened with a soft hydraulic sigh. Inside were passports, a few sealed envelopes, a small pouch of spare keys. No watch. The achy in my jaw grew. The staff had gathered in the corridor now, miles near the kitchen doorway, 2 housekeepers, a groundsman hovering at the edge like he didn't want to be seen wanting to see. Their faces carried something I wasn't used to receiving from people in my house. Not respect. Not fear. Resentment. Pierce saw it too. He didn't comment, but his silence made it worse, like he was letting the atmosphere testify. We moved to the downstairs vault, steel door, fingerprint panel, iris scan. My masterpiece. When it opened, cold air spilled out, carrying the scent of metal and sealed paper. Shelves lined with documents, a locked drawer for jewelry, a small section for heirlooms I rarely touched. I stepped inside and felt my own systems watching me. Pierce stood at the threshold. "Open the heirloom drawer." I did, pulling it out with a steady hand I didn't feel. The drawer slid, and there, nestled in a foam slot like it had never left, was my father's watch. For half a second, my brain refused the image. Then the relief hit, sharp and bright, and with it came something uglier, the realization that relief wasn't the emotion I deserved right now. I stared at the watch, mouth slightly open, as if it might explain itself. The shorter officer let out a breath. "So it was here the whole time." Ariana didn't react, not a blink, not a shift. It was as if her spirit had already stepped back from the room, refusing to attach itself to outcomes that came too late to matter. Pierce looked at the watch, then at me. "You didn't check your vault before calling the police." My throat tightened. I was sure it was in the study. Pierce's tone stayed calm, but it carried weight. "You were sure enough to call us. Sure enough to narrow suspicion to the person you employ." I could feel the staff watching me now with something close to disgust, as if they were finally seeing the machinery behind my standards. Miles's voice came from behind, quiet but edged. "Sir, during the renovation last month, didn't you install that automated relocation system? The one that moves valuables to secondary storage when the sensors detect environmental changes?" The sentence landed like a door closing behind me. I remembered the renovation, the contractors, the humidity sensor upgrades, the security vendor selling me a feature I'd approved, because it sounded like control made intelligent. The auto relocation protocol was meant to protect assets during maintenance. If heat, dust, or motion triggered a risk parameter, it would log the item and move it to the vault for safekeeping. A machine protecting me from the world. And it had done exactly that. My mouth went dry. Eddie, it shouldn't move without notifying me. Miles hesitated. It does notify you, sir, via your admin dashboard. My mind flashed to the dozens of ignored alerts I treated as noise. The way I skimmed notifications like they were beneath my time. The way I trusted myself to be right more than I trusted the system I'd built. Pierce's gaze sharpened. So the watch was relocated automatically, he said, and you never noticed. I swallowed, shame burning my throat. Apparently, the shorter officer turned toward Ariana, his posture softening. Mom, he said, based on what we have, you're cleared. Cleared, like the word could rinse humiliation out of a person's skin. Ariana nodded once, not grateful, not relieved, just acknowledging a fact that should have been obvious before my pride turned it into a spectacle. Pierce didn't step away from me. We still have a problem, he said. What problem? I snapped, then instantly regretted it. The anger sounded thin now, like a suit on the wrong body. Pierce pointed toward the logs the tech had printed. The camera override still happened. Your credentials still initiated it. And it happened 3 minutes before you called the police. Before you even confirmed the watch was actually missing. I felt cold spread down my spine. So what are you saying? I'm saying, Pierce replied. Someone wanted you to make that call. Someone wanted you to accuse her. Someone knew you would. The words hit harder than any accusation in my life, because they weren't about theft. They were about me. The officers began packing up, their professionalism returning now that the narrative had shifted away from Ariana. The staff didn't disperse. Their eyes stayed on me, not out of concern, but out of a newly sharpened understanding. This was what it cost to be wrong in a house full of people who had spent years swallowing your certainty. Ariana stepped forward slightly. Her voice was quiet, almost careful. Am I free to go? The shorter officer nodded. Yes, Mom. You're free to go. Ariana looked at Pierce briefly, acknowledging him, then at the floor, then finally at me. I expected anger. I expected a lecture. I expected something loud enough to match the damage. What I got was worse. Disappointment held with dignity. I'm going to gather my things, she said. My mouth opened. Ariana, whatever I was going to say died before it formed. Apologies were fragile things. And in this moment, mine would have sounded like another attempt at control of how she left, control of how I was seen. She walked away down the corridor, her footsteps soft and measured, the same way they always were. But now, they sounded like a countdown. Pierce stayed behind. You should understand, he said quietly. Being clear doesn't undo what happened here. I know, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. Not fully. Not in the way it would live in Ariana's body later, in the way it would in my staff's eyes. Pierce gave me one last look, then turned to follow the officers out. The house emptied slowly after that. The police cars pulled away. The sirens were gone, but the silence they left behind was different now, less engineered, more accusatory. I stood alone in the foyer for a long time, listening to the faint movement of the staff in the kitchen, the quiet clink of dishes that sounded colder than usual. Then Miles approached, holding an envelope. Sir, he said, not meeting my eyes, Mex, Brooks asked me to give you this. I took it and his hand withdrew as if contact itself might stain him. In my office, I closed the door and stared at the envelope like it was a weapon. My name was written neatly across the front. No anger in the handwriting. No flourish. Just clean professionalism, dignity even in departure. I opened it. The letter inside was short. It didn't accuse me. It didn't beg. It didn't punish me with dramatic language. It was worse than that because it was calm, final, and factual, that like a resignation should be when someone has learned not to expect fairness. She wrote that she could no longer work in a home where her integrity could be questioned so quickly. She thanked me for the opportunity. She noted her last day would be immediate. She apologized for any inconvenience. She apologized. My hands tightened around the paper. The apology burned. I reached the last lines expecting closure, expecting a clean exit. Instead, my eyes caught on a sentence at the bottom, one line she'd added beneath her signature, as if she hadn't wanted to say it but couldn't leave without it. My breath stopped as I read it. Because it wasn't about me at all. It was about what my assumption had just stolen from her. At the bottom of the letter, she wrote, I was saving every extra dollar from this job to pay for my younger brother's medical treatment. That one line at the bottom of Ariana's resignation letter didn't read like an explanation. It read like a quiet verdict. I was saving every extra dollar from this job to pay for my younger brother's medical treatment. I stared at the ink until the letters blurred, then sharpened again, as if my eyes were trying to reinterpret the sentence into something less damning. But there was no softer version of it. There was only the fact that while I had been protecting a watch, she had been protecting a life. And I had aimed the police at her anyway. I sat down in my office chair without meaning to, the leather catching me like a trap. The room around me looked the same, glass, steel, order, but it felt rearranged. The objects didn't change. The meaning did. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't engineered. Shame. Not the shallow kind that fades after an apology and a donation. The kind that crawls under the skin and stays there, insisting you look at what you've done when you'd rather optimize it away. I reread the letter slower. It wasn't angry. It wasn't theatrical. It was disciplined. It was the kind of restraint people develop when anger has never been safe for them. I reached for my phone and typed Ariana's name into my contacts. Nothing. Of course. She'd never been Ariana in my system. She'd been housekeeping lead, a function, a role, something I could sigil evaluate replace. I felt my throat tighten. I called Miles instead. He answered on the second ring, voice cautious. Yes, sir. Do you have Ariana's number? A pause. She asked not to be contacted. I'm asking anyway, I said, then hated myself for how quickly command returned as a reflex. Miles sighed softly. The sound of a man deciding how much dignity he could afford in the presence of wealth. I can give you the number she listed on her employment file. That's all I have. Send it. When it came through, I stared at the digits. A phone number shouldn't feel heavy. This one did, I called. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. No message. No name, just the automated voice that sounded indifferent to human ruin. I hung up and immediately called again, as if persistence could substitute for accountability. Voicemail. I sat back gripping my phone until my knuckles tightened. I wanted to explain. I wanted to justify. I wanted to say the right words, the ones that restored the world to something I could manage. But the truth was simpler and worse. That no sentence I spoke could give her back the hours she stood under scrutiny in my foyer. No money could rewind the moment she realized my suspicion had been waiting for her the whole time. I tried to work. I opened a spreadsheet, forced my eyes onto numbers. The acquisition pressure was still there, the board still circling, the market still hungry. Normally, business drowned everything else. Today, it couldn't drown a single line of ink. So I did what I always did when control slipped. I investigated. I pulled Ariana's employment file from HR records. Not the surface level resume I'd skimmed years ago, but the attached documents, the references, the emergency contacts. The kind of paperwork I demanded as standards, and then filed away like it was proof of my fairness. Her references were glowing, not performative. Specific, reliable and honest to a fault, never calls in late, even when sick. Protects clients' privacy with uncommon integrity. One line from a previous employer stood out more than the rest. She treats elders like they're sacred. I stared at that sentence, uncertain why it made my chest tighten. Then I opened the staff incident reports, small notes logged by Miles over 3 years. A broken vase Ariana admitted to immediately and paid for. A missed shift she covered for another staff member, without being asked. An entry about her leaving early once because of family medical appointment. Family medical appointment. I scrolled further, finding her emergency contact, a woman named Denise Brooks, mother, and beneath that, a second contact listed as Jalen Brooks, minor. I felt the room shift again. Minor meant child, not a teenage sibling, not a cousin, her younger brother, a boy. My hand hovered over the keyboard. Then I did something that would have once felt beneath me. I searched, not the public, glossy search that pulled up awards and headlines. I searched local community boards, neighborhood volunteer pages, small charity newsletters, the corners of the internet where people's real lives lived quietly without press releases. And I found her. Not in articles about scandal or crime. In pictures from a community pantry drive, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, handing bags of food to older residents. In a brief thank you post from a church outreach program, special thanks to Ariana B. for organizing transport for seniors this winter. I clicked a short video clip from a neighborhood app, grainy, casual, that someone's phone recording a moment that wasn't meant to be proof of anything. Ariana stood beside an elderly woman at a curb, lifting grocery bags and guiding her carefully to a car. She smiled, not big, not performed, just warm. The old woman's hand squeezed Ariana's forearm, as if the touch itself was gratitude. Watching it felt like swallowing glass. Because I saw what my house had never shown me. She didn't just endure. She gave. And while she did all that, she was saving for a hospital bill. I turned off the video and stared at my dark monitor, my reflection floating over the black screen like a ghost with expensive skin. My phone buzzed. A message from my assistant board requesting immediate call. Media inquiry flagged. Media inquiry. My stomach tightened. That was fast. Westbridge Heights didn't keep secrets. The nurse's words followed me down the corridor like a sentence I couldn't appeal. If the payment isn't in by tomorrow, we'll have to postpone. I slowed near the pediatric wing doors, suddenly aware of how out of place I looked in a tailored coat, among people wearing exhaustion like a uniform. Here, no one cared who owned what, no one cared what my name opened. Pain didn't recognize status. Room numbers marched along the hallway. 308, 310, 312. I didn't go in. I stopped outside the door and stood there with my hand hovering in the air, as if I could knock and step into Ariana's life like it was another room in my mansion. The idea made my stomach twist. After what I'd done, showing up uninvited would be another form of taking. So I stepped back and watched through the small window in the door instead, only a brief glance, only enough to confirm what I already feared. Ariana stood near the bed, speaking to a woman I assumed was her mother. Their bodies leaned inward, sharing weight. On the bed, a boy lay too still, his face pale in a way that looked wrong on someone so young. A monitor blinked. A plastic bracelet circled his wrist. Ariana didn't look like my employee there. She looked like someone holding a world together with her hands. I walked away before I could become a shadow they had to deal with. In the lobby, I found a quiet corner and called Detective Pierce. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I need to make a statement, I said the moment he answered. Pierce didn't ask which kind. To whom? To you? To the department. Whoever needs it, I replied. I made assumptions. I escalated without verifying. I wanted on record that Ariana Brooks was cleared and that my report was irresponsible. A pause. Then Pierce's voice softened by a fraction. It's not enough, I said. No, Pierce agreed. It isn't. I held my phone tighter. What happens to the override investigation? We're still running it, Pierce said. But without an actual theft, the urgency changes. It becomes internal tampering. If someone used your credentials, they did it to trigger this chain reaction. That part still matters. Matters, I echoed, staring at nothing. Pierce's tone sharpened again. And Mr. Calloway, if you're making a formal acknowledgement, understand this. It may be discoverable if she files a civil claim. I know, I said, and I meant it. Do it anyway. Silence sat between us. And Pierce spoke quieter. Right, I'll document your statement. When I ended the call, my body felt hollowed out, as if confession had taken something structural from me. My pride tried to scramble. To rebuild, you're protecting the company. You're controlling the narrative. But I could no longer pretend this was about narrative. It was about harm. I left the hospital and drove not back to the mansion, but to my office downtown, because the mansion felt like a lie now, and the office was at least honest about what it was, a machine designed to preserve me. The board meeting was already waiting in my calendar like a trap I'd built for myself. Faces on a screen, expensive lighting, controlled voices. One director leaned forward. "Sebastian, we need to discuss containment. The police were at your home. In Westbridge Heights. That kind of thing travels." Another colder. "We've received inquiries from 2 outlets. Nothing published yet, but it's coming." A third. "Do we have legal exposure?" I listened, and something in me shifted. A week ago, their panic would have felt like my panic. Today it felt small. "I'm making a public acknowledgement," I said. The screen went still. "What?" The cold one snapped. "I accused an innocent employee," I continued, voice level. "I called law enforcement without verifying facts. I won't hide behind legal language to protect my pride." A director's eyes narrowed. "That's not pride. That's the company. Your image is tied to shareholder confidence." "My image," I repeated, tasting the words like poison, "is not more important than what I did." They spoke over each other for a moment, risk, brand, optics, until the chairman raised a hand. "Sebastian," he said carefully, "if you do this publicly, you invite litigation and reputational damage." I nodded. "I already caused damage. The question is whether I compound it by refusing to own it." A thick silence followed, the kind that usually made people retreat. I didn't. Because for the first time, surrender didn't feel like weakness. It felt like the only remaining form of strength that wasn't cruelty. After the call ended, my general counsel sent me a draft statement, carefully worded, sterile, designed to admit nothing while sounding compassionate. It read like corporate perfume sprayed over rot. I deleted it. Then I wrote my own, a brief and plain, and instructed my legal team to submit it to the department and keep it ready for press if needed. I didn't embellish. I didn't excuse. I simply named what I'd done, and the naming hurt. The next decision came faster than I expected, because it was the one I knew how to make best. Money. I called the hospital billing office from a private line, using my assistant to navigate the bureaucracy without revealing my identity. I provided an amount that would cover the immediate deposit and several rounds of treatment beyond that. I asked that it be recorded as anonymous. It felt, for a moment, like relief, like control returning. Then the relief curdled, because I recognized the old instinct underneath it, the desire to solve the discomfort by paying it away. Redemption is transaction. I told myself it wasn't that. I told myself it was urgent, necessary, humane. But deep down, I knew the truth. It was also a shortcut. 2 hours later, my phone lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number. I answered, expecting legal counsel. Instead, Ariana's voice came through, quiet, steady, exhausted in a way that made me sit up straight. "Mr. Calloway," she said. My throat tightened. "Ariana." There was a pause, long enough to feel like distance measured in years. "They told my mother someone paid," she said. No gratitude, no softness, just fact. "They wouldn't tell her who." I swallowed. "It was anonymous. I know it was you," she replied, and in the calmness of her certainty, I heard a boundary forming. "You think money is an apology. I think your brother deserves care," I said quickly. "And I?" "No." Voice still controlled, but sharper now. "Don't do that. Don't turn him into your redemption project." The words hit hard because they were true. "I'm not asking for pity," she continued, "and I'm not accepting charity from the same hand that called the police on me." My mouth went dry. "It isn't charity." "It is to me," she said, "because you didn't ask what I needed. You decided. That's what you always do, silence." In that silence, I realized most humiliating thing of all. Even now, even after everything, my instinct had been to keep power in my hands, to fix it my way. Ariana's voice softened by a fraction, and that softness was not mercy. It was wariness. "You can't buy back dignity," she said. You can't buy back what it felt like standing in your house with officers looking at me like I was already guilty. I know? I whispered. No. She replied, and that single word carried a weight that made my chest ache. You don't. Not yet. I closed my eyes. Tell me what to do. Ariana exhaled, slow and controlled. Stop trying to do something that makes you feel better. If you want to apologize, do it like a human being, not like a man signing a check. My fingers tightened around the phone. Then let me meet you, face to face, a beat. I'm not your employee anymore, she said. I know, I replied. That's why I'm asking as just a man. A quiet sound, almost a laugh, but without humor. Men like you don't know how to be just anything. The line stung because it carried history, not just mine. Outside my office windows, evening settled over the city, and for once I didn't feel above it. I felt inside it one flawed person among millions, finally subject to consequence. Ariana, I said, careful now, please. I'm not asking to fix it. I'm asking to acknowledge it. Properly. Another pause. I could hear faint hospital sounds on her end, an intercom, a cart rolling, someone speaking softly. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but there was something new in it, a condition being sharpened into a blade. I'll meet you, she said. My breath caught. When? Tomorrow? She replied. Not at your house. Not at your office. Where then? At the community center on Linden, she said. Where I volunteer. Where people don't get to hide behind gates. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Okay. Then she added the final line, quiet and absolute, the line that challenged everything I believed about control. And when you come, Ariana said, you come without your lawyers, without your security, and without your name doing the talking for you. I arrived at the Linden Community Center without my security detail for the first time in years, and the absence felt like stepping outside without skin. My car was still expensive. My coat still fit like armor. But the things that usually shielded me, men with earpieces, polished intimidation, the quiet authority of being escorted, were gone by Ariana's deserted. I parked among dented sedans and aging minivans, that then sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the faded mural painted on the building's exterior. Children holding hands beneath a sky too blue to be real. It wasn't my world, that was the point. Inside, the building smelled like floor cleaner and old paper and coffee that had been reheated too many times. The lobby walls were covered in flyers, after school tutoring, food pantry hours, a grief support group, practical mercy, stapled in place. Ariana was near the front desk, speaking to a volunteer in a red sweater. She didn't turn when I entered. She didn't need to. She carried awareness the way other people carried keys. When she finally looked at me, her expression was not hostile. It was measured. Like she'd decided to treat this moment the way she treated everything else, carefully, with dignity, without letting my discomfort become her responsibility. You came, she said. I said I would, I replied. She nodded once, then gestured toward a multi-purpose room down the hall. In there. I followed, feeling eyes on me, curious, cautious, recognizing me not from friendship but from rumor. Westbridge Heights scandal had already started leaking past its gates. Inside the room, folding chairs were arranged in rows. A few staff members from the community center stood along the back wall. I recognized two of my own household staff near the front, Miles and one of the housekeepers, faces tight, uncertain what loyalty meant today. At the far side, a whiteboard had been rolled forward. Someone had written in neat block letters, my stomach clenched. Ariana wasn't just asking for a conversation. She was asking for exposure. I'm not doing this privately, she said, as if reading my thoughts. Because what happened to me wasn't private. I swallowed. You want me to speak to the association? And to your staff? She added. The people who watched you decide I was guilty before you looked for the truth. The people who work in homes like yours and learn how fast a reputation can be destroyed. The word reputation hit me differently now. I'd once treated it as currency. Now it felt like a weapon I'd used without realizing how sharp it was. A murmur rose outside in the hallway. The meeting was gathering. Chairs scraped. voices layered. A familiar Westbridge polish mixed with something rougher, community members, volunteers, people who didn't have time to pretend life was fair. My chest tightened. Ariana, I'm here. I'll apologize, publicly. But you want to control it, she said quietly, not cruel, just accurate. You want it to be neat. You want it to end clean. It won't. I stared at her, and for a moment the old reflex surged: defend, explain, reclaim authority. Then I saw the faint strain at the corners of her mouth, the exhaustion in her eyes that didn't go away even when she stood perfectly straight. I'd already taken too much from her. So I nodded. Tell me what you need. Ariana's gaze held mine. I need you to say the truth. Not the version that protects you. The version that costs you something. The doors opened and people filed in. Members of the Westbridge Heights Neighborhood Association took seats near the front, their faces composed in that particular way wealthy communities practice, concern carefully measured so it doesn't look like guilt. Behind them sat community center volunteers, a few local residents, my staff, and people I didn't know at all but could feel judging me with a kind of honesty my board never offered. Detective Pierce appeared near the back, leaning against the wall like a shadow that had decided to become visible. His presence wasn't threatening. It was grounding. A witness who couldn't be bought. A man in a blazer stood and tapped the whiteboard marker against his palm. We're here to address an incident that has raised serious concerns, he said, voice practiced. The Mr. Calloway, you requested to speak. Requested. As if this was voluntary, as if I hadn't been cornered by consequence. I stood, my legs felt heavy, like my body wanted to refuse the act of humility, even if my mind demanded it. Every face turned toward me. In the past, rooms turning toward me had felt like victory. Today it felt like judgment, and deserved. I opened my mouth and found no speech waiting behind my teeth. I had prepared none. My instinct had been to craft something strategic, something that sounded accountable while remaining safe. Ariana's words returned the version that cost you something. So I stopped looking for safety. I called the police on an innocent woman, I said. The sentence landed hard, no softening, no legal framing. No misunderstanding. The room shifted, a collective inhale. A wealthy woman in the front row pressed her together, as if she didn't like the sound of plain truth. I continued, voice steady but not polished. I did it because I believed something was missing, and I decided I knew who must have taken it. I did not verify. I did not check my own vault. I did not consider other explanations. I swallowed. My throat burned, and I need to name something else. I added, forcing the words through a part of me that wanted to choke them off. I did it because bias made the accusation feel easy. A ripple moved through the room. Not loud, but sharp. The association man's eyes widened slightly. This was not the script he wanted. I kept going, because stopping would have been another form of cowardice. I hid behind security standards. I hid behind the idea that control equals righteousness. But what I did was treat Ariana Brooks like a threat in my home, because I could. Because power makes assumptions feel like instincts instead of choices. My hands tightened at my sides. I'm sorry, I said, and the words sounded small in a room full of harm. Not because I was embarrassed. Not because my reputation was shaken. I'm sorry because I used the weight of the law to humiliate a woman who had earned my trust 1,000 times over, and I still didn't give it to her when it mattered. Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that forces people to sit with what they'd rather avoid. I turned slightly toward Ariana, careful not to make the moment about my performance. Ariana was cleared, I said. She has no record, no history, nothing to justify what I did. And yet my first instinct was to suspect her. That's on me. Ariana's face remained composed, but I saw her eyes glisten again, and not tears falling, just emotion refusing to be hidden. I faced the room again. If anyone here repeated this story, I said, voice firm now, I want it corrected. Immediately. Ariana did not steal from me. Ariana did not lie. Ariana did not deserve what happened in my home. I paused, letting the words do what money couldn't, restore truth out loud. Then, because Ariana had demanded cost, I added what I hadn't planned to say until I realized I had to. I'm also committing to changes, I said. Not just in my house, in my company. Transparent HR policies, independent complaint channels, bias training led by outside experts, not internal PR. And my throat tightened. And my household staff will never again be subject to police involvement without verification and due process. Not at my whim. A few people nodded. Some looked unconvinced. They had every right. I turned fully toward Ariana now. I offered you your position back, I said, and my stomach clenched because even saying it sounded transactional. I want to say this clearly: there is no expectation. No pressure. No attempt to buy forgiveness. You owe me nothing. Ariana stood slowly. The room held its breath, waiting to see whether she would accept, reject, explode. She didn't do any of those things. I won't come back, she said simply. The words struck me with a clean finality. My pride tried to flinch, but there was no room left for it. Ariana looked at the room, then back at me. I'm not declining because I hate you, she continued. I'm declining because I can't rebuild my dignity in the same place it was broken. Her voice stayed steady, but the truth in it was devastating. Then she said the thing I hadn't realized I needed to hear, because it wasn't mercy. It was clarity. But I accept your apology, Ariana said, because I need to keep my own heart from being poisoned by what you did. A low murmur moved through the room. Someone in the back exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for days. Detective Pierce watched quietly, his face unreadable, but I saw a faint approval in his posture. Not for me, but for the fact that truth had been spoken where it usually wasn't. The association man cleared his throat, trying to regain structure. Thank you, Ms. Brooks, he said, voice stiff. And Mr. Calloway, we will. Ariana lifted a hand slightly, stopping him without aggression. No, she said. This isn't about what you'll do next. It's about what he will do when no one is watching. Her eyes returned to me. And for the first time, I understood that accountability was not an event. It was a practice. After the meeting broke, people filed out in small clusters, whispers trailing behind them like smoke. Some glanced at me with something close to respect, others with something close to contempt, most with uncertainty. The neighborhood didn't know how to hold a powerful man who had admitted weakness without turning it into a performance. Outside, in the parking lot, Ariana walked toward a sedan that looked older than my first watch. Her shoulders were back. Her head was high. She moved like someone who had survived humiliation without letting it define her. I stood by my car and watched, feeling the sting of a new kind of loss. Not the loss of a watch. The loss of the illusion that restoration was guaranteed if I did the right thing now. Ariana opened her car door, then paused, glancing back at me one last time. There was no tenderness in her expression. No cruelty either. Just a boundary that would not move. Then she got in and drove away. I didn't follow. I didn't call after her. I simply stood still, not frozen by fear, but by awareness, watching the space where she'd been and realizing the truth that settled in my chest like a permanent weight. Forgiveness does not guarantee restoration. And as her car disappeared beyond the corner, I understood something that would haunt me long after the neighborhood moved on to its next scandal. I could change, I could confess, I could kneel, but I might still have to live in a life where the person I wronged never comes back to see who I became. If this story stayed with you, let us know in the comments what moment impacted you the most. Your perspective matters here. Subscribe for stories that don't rush healing, but earn it.